Media recognition from Bloomberg, Reuters, recycling trade publications. Patented process for 100% recovery of critical metals, including cobalt, lithium, nickel, manganese, aluminum. American Manganese is focused on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. American Manganese trades on the TSX Venture, AMY, the US, AMYZF, and Frankfurt 2AM. For more information, visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
Welcome to the Goddard Report. Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Kris Sims, BC Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, her website taxpayer.com. Welcome back to the show, Kris.
Thank you so much for having us.
Kris, the Phoenix pay system used by the federal government's been around now for quite some time, but it's costing us a fortune, and is it fixed yet?
No, it's not fixed yet, and yes, it's costing us a fortune. For listeners who don't know what this is, basically the Phoenix pay system is a massive software program that is supposed to handle the pay stubs for all people who are paid by the federal government. Now, that can go from your garden variety bureaucrat that's working at the Department of Transportation in Gatineau, Quebec, or it could be somebody that's helping folks in the Coast Guard off the west coast of BC. So it's that wide a variety of folks who get that federal government pay. Now, back in the last year or so of former Prime Minister Stephen Harper's term, they started testing this thing out. And it apparently was glitchy and wasn't working. Twice, apparently, the government side, the political side, said, hey, let's go for it. And twice, reportedly, the bureaucrats in charge of it said, it's not quite ready yet. So they apparently held off. So 2 different times they tried rolling it out to make it take over from their previous system, and twice they hit pause because it wasn't ready. Then the 2015 election happened, and the story goes that over that Christmas break and into January, somebody dropped the ball, and they said, it's scheduled to start rolling now. And we don't know if a bureaucrat warned the now brand new Trudeau government then, hey, sir, this is not yet ready, or if they did and were just ignored. Either way, it went live. And same way that happened with Skynet in the Terminator movies, it just went crazy. Some folks started getting paid way too much. And while that might sound funny or fun, as if, the ATM is printing you magic money, that's a major problem because obviously that money is not yours. You have to account for every nickel of it. You have to hold on to it forever. And then on the other side of the spectrum, some folks weren't getting paid, period. And, we'll say that we don't want bureaucrats wasting money and we want them to be more frugal, but if they're doing work, they should be getting paid for it. And in some cases, folks weren't getting paid for a year. They were losing their vehicles. They were having to move back in with their parents. They weren't able to make their bill payments, but they've got this really good job, right? Air quotes. And so they didn't feel like they could leave it to go get paid. So they were in a really terrible situation. And unfortunately, somehow, while trying to fix this thing and make it work, it's cost taxpayers $2 billion. That's with a B. To give you an idea, Jim, if you started counting the loonies right now, if you sat in front of a table and dumped all the money on the table and started counting them out, it would take you and I 60 years to count up $2 billion. That's how much they've wasted.
Why isn't the company that developed this paying to fix it instead of taxpayers?
That's a great question, and it's something, frankly, that the Public Accounts Committee and the Internal Economy Committee, both on Parliament Hill, need to examine. I mean, we have the power to subpoena. We have members of Parliament. We have legislators, people who literally research and write law. That's what MPs are, and their staff are, and departmental experts are. They should be asking these questions in committee at no extra cost to taxpayers and getting some answers on it. Because it is completely unfair for taxpayers to have been on the hook for this big of a mistake. So they need to figure that out.
Now, why haven't they examined this and told the inventors of this flawed program to fix it and do it for free? Why do we have to pay?
We don't have that answer yet, frankly. They did do some door kicking a little bit, but it was mostly to find out what kind of an impact it had on people. And so that's where they had different employees, like I said, everybody from the garden variety bureaucrat in Gatineau, Quebec, that was not getting paid at all, to the Coast Guard out on, the ship that was getting way overpaid and had to somehow account for it. And so they got those kind of testimonials directly from people, but they didn't get answers as to from the company that was responsible or why they weren't responsible, who signed off on this. We need those sorts of accountability answers here, not just the what happened. We need to get down to the why it happened and who's responsible. And if we can't hold them responsible now, for heaven's sake, to learn from this extremely expensive mistake and never bloody well do it again.
Why is it computer glitches are accepted, but any other consumer product that's defective, you see lawsuits, recalls, and so on? But if it's a computer program, why do we even accept that computer programs happen, and somehow as the consumer, I'm the one on the hook for it?
Isn't that odd? Taking off my CTF hat, I would just answer as a human. I think a lot of people, because most of us don't know, quote unquote, how to code, most of us don't understand how these programs are built. It becomes so foreign that we don't have the connectivity to it, and therefore maybe we don't feel like we have the agency or the right to speak up about it. For example, if, I'm my slow cooker, I bought it from a store and it stopped working. I know how to cook. I generally know that it's a piece of wire that goes from my electrical outlet into the heating element. I can understand that that is malfunctioning, and I can hold the company accountable and get a refund for it. If I had to try to tell you how my smartphone actually works, I'm at a loss, and most average folks are. Perhaps that's the disconnect. But as we move along and the younger generations are getting better and better at it and they swim in this sort of technology, hopefully we will be able to have more accountability on this stuff, because we can't just keep shrugging our shoulders and say, oh, well, computer error or software error, especially when it costs average people $2 billion.
And in some cases it could cost lives, like the 737 MAX software glitch.
Right. That's right. So we get back down here to government accountability. This could be even human error. Maybe they tried reinstalling it so many times that it's, to speak colloquially, fried the circuit. We don't know that. So we need to figure out who screwed up and why. And it's just really too bad that it's cost this much money. And that's what's, I think, puzzling a lot of people. I know we've seen expensive repair bills before for things, washer, dryers, or furnace, things like that. How do you spend $2 billion trying to fix software? That needs some answers, yesterday.
Also, if the system's not working, why didn't they just revert back to the old one that seemed to be working just fine? And even if the computers didn't work, why not just have your manager say, what do you get paid? Here's a check, I'll sign it.
Yes, exactly. That's what a lot of people are asking. Can't you just go back to the old system? And apparently, we heard during some of the testimonies that some of the information was lost in the transition over. It was too difficult for them to be able to backtrack now. It's almost as if you're trying to get to a destination and they decided it would have taken longer to turn around and go back than to keep going forward. But at a $2 billion repair tag so far, that sounds like that was probably the wrong decision.
We'll have more with Kris Sims right after this.
Engineer Gold Mines is focused on the exploration and development of the historic high-grade Engineer Gold Mine situated 32 kilometers southwest of Atlin, British Columbia. Engineer Gold Mines is fully permitted for surface and underground exploration with the drill program now underway. Engineer Gold Mines Limited trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol EAU. For more information, please visit us at engineergoldmines.com.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Kris Sims. Kris, a lot of Canada is on fire right now. Every time we've seen major forest fires in the fall, we hear the government say we're going to have mitigation programs to protect cities and towns from forest fires. Yet the village of Lytton was destroyed in 30 minutes by a forest fire that swept through that community. At least 2 people were killed. Why haven't we built these fire breaks around towns and cities yet? Wouldn't that save money in the long run?
You'd think it would save money in the long run, especially if you're trying to reconstruct, an entire village that has been there since, gold rush times, and obviously before that with our First Nations peoples. That's a good question. And I think sometimes it's based on attention span. I think it's easier sometimes for governments to make kind of good news announcements at peak times and peak periods that they can then point to. Whereas doing the proper planning of making sure, for example, I've just heard fire experts describe them as having special fire retardant systems where you have machinery that can put up they call it a wall of water, where they use it from say a local river or a lake, that they've dug a dam almost or an embankment around certain cities, especially if they're in a really hot spot. Those sort of things just don't get the press coverage, I find. They're one of those kind of really important elements of infrastructure, the same way we do, say, waste treatment or water treatment. They're essential to our civilization, but to use a media term, they're not sexy. So I think sometimes ministers and their staff can kind of get disheartened. But the way to change this is the folks listening right now, as voters and as consumers of media, phone your local MLA and your local MP and your mayor and say, hey, I know that you guys get more kudos when you're talking about, a bike lane or a water park or something for little kids downtown. We like all those things just fine, but this major piece of infrastructure that is about emergency preparedness is very important, and I will vote for you based on it. And I will get all of my friends and neighbors to do so. So the responsibility falls back on us in some of those cases. We need to make sure that those things are a priority.
Well, we've seen a fire halfway across the nation can affect the air quality of somebody else, and that makes it a health concern, a provincial priority. So why aren't they focusing on this more? Because it seems every year we see these massive fires, and again, measures could have been taken. Hell, why aren't we letting sheep just wander through the forest and take out the underbrush where the fire spreads?
I get that question a lot because I live out in the Fraser Valley, and I grew up in the Fraser Canyon, right near Lytton, actually. And so I hear this from folks quite often, especially who've worked in forestry, who've been loggers. And they say, they'll say anecdotally, like 30, 40 years ago, we did a much better job of forest management. They cleaned up the underbrush. They cleaned up the deadfall. They did them in burn piles when it was really, damp in the fall or in the spring, and it was safe to do so. And so I think sometimes, again, it leads to a sense of unawareness. Perhaps it's in the media. Perhaps it's in ourselves of not being able to pay attention and truly hear somebody out when they're talking about these factors. Remember when former U.S. President Donald Trump had said that you need to clean up the forest. Now, he said it in his usual kind of blunt way, and the only thing people did was make fun of him about, quote-unquote, raking the forest, like as if all of us should go out into the woods with our little rakes from Home Hardware. I don't think that's what he meant. He was speaking in a very simple way, but from what he was saying was forest management. And you hear experts in forestry talk about doing just that. Clearing out deadfall, making sure that it isn't tinder dry, digging kind of fire ditches where they fill it with rocks and so the sparks can't fly over top of it as easily. Those sorts of elements you just don't hear talked about in that really thorough way. So again, we have the mechanisms to fix this stuff, and it wouldn't cost us money to figure it out. We literally pay MLAs and members of parliament and experts within departments of natural resources. We pay these people. We pay them a lot of money. Most of them make well over $100,000 a year. We should be getting them to do this homework, come up with these comprehensive plans, all at the same cost, and then go ahead and implement them. But I think sometimes our attention gets distracted, the headlines change, and people wander away from an issue. But we can't afford to keep wandering away from this one.
Well, governments always use the excuse, we were distracted by COVID, we were distracted by something else. But don't you have multiple ministers in charge of multiple things? Can't they do more than one thing at once?
Yeah.
You have the people and you pay them.
Yeah. Darn straight. The minister in charge of forests has very little to do with COVID right now. Like, very little to do. They and their staff in the department, because keep in mind, it isn't just the political side. We only see the political side. They have, in some cases, dozens or even hundreds of people who are experts and very well paid with very permanent, safe jobs working in the department side. So those are the folks that don't stand for election, but they still work within that ministry. It's their job. We should be using the smart people that we have in government to the best of their ability in order to head off these problems. And see, this is where it gets people crazy, where they work in, say, a company. They work in the private sector. They work for a great NGO or a corporation where they're very responsive to their membership or to their customers, and they have to be on point. And if they aren't, their market share will fall. Their widgets won't sell. We have to bring that same sort of attitude into government. We have to have a sense of excellence. And so that's where this is part of our point about holding governments accountable. We have to hold them accountable for falling down on the job. And this isn't about politics. We're not pointing the figure at just the BC Liberals or just the BC NDP. All of the government needs to do a better job of this stuff because it is their job. And when we have a town burned down, we can't just shrug our shoulders and say, oh, well, climate change and move on. If it is climate change, fine. We need to work to fight against the mitigating factors of that. And we have to just physically protect towns and cities from it. Do the work.
The government claims that carbon taxes will fight climate change. So far in BC, we've had the most carbon taxes for the longest in Canada. What kind of an impact have they had on protecting the environment?
Unfortunately, nothing. And it's really too bad. So to give you an idea, we now take around $2 billion from average British Columbians every year in just the first BC carbon tax, because we pay two. So that means when you're filling up your Dodge Caravan, your minivan, when you're heating your home with natural gas, when you're cooking your food, if you're a grocery store and you're using climate control using natural gas, that's a huge markup too. You're paying the carbon tax there. Our emissions are going up. They are going up and not down. That is because things such as transportation to and from work or heating your home, that is an inelastic demand. And the vast majority of people cannot afford to go, switch to electric tomorrow. They still depend on things like gasoline for their vehicles, diesel for their trucks to deliver our food, and natural gas for grain drying, for example, for prairie farmers, or for heating your home. And so that is still a reality. And so we'll just pay it. You just pay that tax. Now, unfortunately, again, because it's inelastic and we need it, the emissions just keep going up anyway. The only result is that government coffers are getting fatter on this. So they've got around $2 billion that they're taking in every year, and emissions keep going up. If we truly were concerned about global emissions, because this is a global problem, the experts keep telling us, because we are so tiny, like our population compared to places such as India and China are just minuscule. We're a fraction. Even if we stopped everything tomorrow, like stop eating, stop driving to work, we wouldn't have an impact. But if, for example, we sell our much cleaner burning natural gas to a democracy such as India, which is currently using animal dung and wood pulp and in some cases coal that's in a very dirty form, they would reduce their emissions, global emissions, because they've got hundreds of millions of people doing it. And so if we sell them our cleaner burning natural gas, which they're asking us to do it, we will have an impact on global emissions. And hopefully we could mitigate some of these problems. But we need to do both. We should sell them our much cleaner energy as Canadians, which has been, ethically harvested from our country. And we should try to build firewalls around our cities and towns that are at risk. Do both.
The BC government deficit is much less than expected. Is this good news for taxpayers?
Yes, it is good news. Let's start with good news. Experts were worried that we were going to be paying around $13.5 billion in our deficit. That was last September. They were estimating that. Good news is the deficit is actually $5.5 billion. Now, it sounds weird for me to be saying good news. It's $5.5 billion, but credit where it's due. We came through this better than we were fearing. So that's a good sign. However, there's a caution here, and it's a big one. Our debt keeps going up. It's going up a lot. It's going up exponentially, unfortunately. And to give you an idea, projection-wise, the BC government is planning on spending basically at the current levels we are now, like COVID level emergency panic spending, 3 years from now, when hopefully we won't have a big emergency. We can't do that. We cannot make emergency spending permanent because we just can't afford it. And if you go back to the Parliamentary Budget Officer numbers, federally speaking, it's just a disaster. There's no other way of putting it. We won't even come near to balancing the budget for more than 50 years. And when you look at the province, the Parliamentary Budget Officer also did work there. They also said that provincially speaking, because the provincial government is responsible for cities and towns constitutionally, that we actually won't balance the budget in British Columbia with all of it included until around the year 2080. So we can't keep going along this trajectory. We have to get deficit spending under control in order to fight the debt.
And federally, the Parliamentary Budget Office says if current spending trends continues, we won't see a federal balanced budget until 2070. Aren't those targets out there? They're not really targets, more of a warning, isn't it?
It is a major warning. And to be clear, the Parliamentary Budget Officer is a non-partisan office. So they've got the Chief Parliamentary Budget Officer. They have staff that work with them as well. And they have done all of this number crunching, and they're the ones that are warning, saying, hey, folks, we cannot afford this. So they're the ones saying, federally, we won't be balancing it for more than 50 years. We need to get on top of this. And they're also the ones that did a deep dive into the provincial budgets and the budgets of cities and towns, which is new. Usually people don't include municipalities in the debt levels for provincial budgets, but they did. And they're the ones that are clanging this warning bell. And so we have to reflect that.
Kris, anything else we should be keeping an eye on right now?
That's the major issue here, is that as we emerge from this current COVID tunnel of hell, and hopefully we're through it, knock wood, that we really need to start focusing on deficit spending to make sure that we keep fighting our debt. Because we have to keep in mind that not only are we spending money right now, we're spending money with interest. So that means that for every dollar that we're spending in interest, that dollar is not going to paramedics. That dollar is not going to fighting forest fires. That dollar is going to a bond manager in Toronto. And right now our interest rates are at rock bottom. What happens, heaven forbid, a few years from now if that interest rate goes up? We're going to be spending more and more. So as we emerge right now, hopefully we're through this emergency. We really need to buckle down, look at our finances, separate our needs and our wants, and start fighting these deficits.
Kris, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Thank you for caring.
Kris, if people want to talk to you about some of these issues or comment on them, what should they do?
I would love to hear from them. They can go to our website, taxpayer.com. There they can sign our petitions, they can take a look at the work that we're doing, and they can also send all of us an email. They can email me directly at any time. My email is ksims@taxpayer.com, and raise your issues there. We also have a great way of writing letters and good tips on how to get your message through firmly but politely to politicians on our website.
Kris, thanks again.
Thank you.
My guest has been Kris Sims, BC Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. If you have any questions for Kris, you can also send them to us, and we'll ask them on your behalf. Send them to info@housestreet.com, our YouTube channel, Talk Digital Network. Find us on Twitter at Talk Digital Net. We're also on Facebook. I'm Jim Goddard. Thank you for listening.
Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. The Goddard Report is available online and mobile at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. The Goddard Report is a production of House Street Media Incorporated.